Welcome to 2021 and Happy New Year to our listeners. Today is the start of a short series of Nature Magic podcasts, talking to people who are dedicated to nature education.
We have a lot to learn from children. Allowing them the time and space to connect to nature not only educates them and allows them a secure foundation in life, but also educates us how to reconnect to the natural world and the benefits that brings to ourselves and the planet. Today I'm speaking to Michelle Lawton. Michelle founded Stretch the Imagination in 2002. Stretch is a program where children are free to explore and delve deeply into their experiences. Michelle has a passion for connecting children to the natural world, and she started the Natural Classroom in 2010, bringing children out of the classroom and into nature during their weekly school days. Over the past 10 years, the Natural Classroom has developed into a respected preschool program grounded in nurturing children's development through creativity, inquiry, and connecting to the natural world. Michelle is also invested in supporting professional development and encouraging the growth of educators who come to work at Stretch. She continued her own education in 2014 by studying with John Young and the educators of the 8 Shields Institute, and she recently finished studying with Dan Siegel at the Mindsight Institute in Los Angeles. We are lucky to speak to Michelle today, who has such a deep understanding of the hands-on approach to engaging children with nature and also the logistics of setting up programs such as the Natural Classroom. Welcome, Michelle Lawton. Hi, everybody. It's lovely today to be speaking to Michelle Lawton.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're so welcome. Would you like to tell us a little bit about where you are? And we're going to really dig deep in this series about connections with nature and engaging with nature. So all the exciting things that you do.
Sure. So I'm based in San Francisco. And in the heart of the city, I run a preschool called Stretch the Imagination, where we have children aged 2 to about 6 years of age. We even have a toddler program for 18 months to 24 months that's 100% set in the forest normally during the school year. And we use all of the green spaces that we are really lucky to have in San Francisco. So we have a federal park, the Presidio, that has been for 10 years welcoming us into the forest. And then we also have Golden Gate Park, which is huge, which we're using a lot this year. Because of COVID, there's so many more people out in the nature spaces. And so we've kind of spread out across the city, but we really do explore all the nature spaces around San Francisco and really have what we call a connection model versus education or recreation. Our goal is focused on connection of young children and really just humans to the other species of the world.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So we'll dig deep into what you're doing. And I'd just like to ask you the normal nature magic questions. How did you become a nature lover?
You know, I was lucky enough to have been raised in nature. My parents lived on an island actually in the southeast of the United States where it was very undeveloped. Sadly, it's a very developed kind of golf mecca. It's called Hilton Head Island in South Carolina. But when they first went there wasn't a hospital. There wasn't, my dad and mom used to always say there were more mosquitoes than there were humans. And really, the ocean was one side of my life, and then the forest was the other. And it was the 70s, so parents weren't really that overlooking of their children. And we were 8 and then told back to come back when we were hungry. And we spent most of the hours, in nature by ourselves. And so I just, by default, really connected with the natural world. I mean, it was my whole playscape with my siblings growing up.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get into the nature education?
Actually, that was really interesting. I had been an educator. I was running Stretch, the preschool that I have. I've been doing it for about 7 years, I would say, when I read the book Last Child in the Woods, which is by an author from the United States named Richard Louv.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about kind of that loss of nature. It really reminded me of what I had grown up with, but then also in juxtaposition to what children were lacking and not able to connect with as much. And I was, as a director of a preschool, I thought, wow, I have the opportunity to bring children into nature right now. I read that book in March, and we started our first natural classroom program the next September as the school year started, and have been doing it for the last 10 years, where we bring children into the forest every week, rain or shine, which is also really important to me. It's not just on the sunny days do we learn to love nature, but to see it through the seasons and the weather and all the changes. And so that really launched, that was the spark. And then it's really developed over time. I came in contact with a man by the name of John Young here, who has the Eight Shields organization, and Weaving Earth, which is another local group based in a connection model. And that deepened for sure our core routines and how we worked in nature. And before that, I actually met John Young through a woman by the name of Claire Warden, who's out of Scotland, who has been doing amazing work in Scotland, and was really inspired by her work as well, of just what you could do with really young children, because she works with preschool age children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have the greatest respect for small children, even pre-verbal. We sometimes think, look down on them and think they don't know what's going on, but they can answer questions if you just give them enough time and try and understand them. So have you any particular success stories with engaging with nature, or any failures that might entertain us?
Yeah. One of the things I think is a big success is when we first started this program in our school, it was really about bringing the children out. And there were certain parents that were a little bit worried. I mean, I think in the beginning, when your child's 2, some parents felt safer with their children in the walls they dropped them off at than in a big forest. But really quickly over time, we engaged the parents. They volunteer in the program, and we engaged them in the same process as we were engaging the children. And I think that was a huge success. Our whole community is now connected with nature. People come to our school for that connection, and the parents really are doing the practices on the weekends when we're not around. But it's becoming, it's not only the young children, but it's whole families that are becoming nature connected. So I feel like for what our goal is, which is really stewardship, and our number one goal, I think, in some ways, is for everyone to see themselves as part of the natural world, not other than, outside of, looking down on it or looking to it from the outside, but really part of that ecosystem. And so engaging the parents was a huge success, I think, and an important part of that process.
Yeah, I totally understand that. When we opened the Nature Centre, it was for all ages. We had put in facilities for children, but we quickly realised the only people that wanted to come at the start were the children. And the parents were bringing them because, we want to go, and there's an adventure playground and there's animals and this and that. So we became quickly known as a family place, which went against us in one way, because some of the adults that wanted a nice leisurely stroll think, oh my, no, that place is completely wedged with children. We'll go somewhere else. But the children have taught the adults. And over the last 7 years, we've had 20,000 children taking the Leave No Trace school tour. Wow. Yeah, and we do give them a little incentive to come back. We give them a sort of money off voucher, but they all drag their parents back and bring them around the nature walk to teach them the lessons. So I do agree, it's the adults we need, but somehow it's easier to get through to the children.
I think children are so connected naturally to nature. I feel like if I look back at my history, when I was younger, I was really connected. And then over time, whether I moved to a big city, like I lived in New York for a little while, and there were different parts of my life that I became more disconnected from it. But then again, working with children brought me back into connection, I think, with nature, because they are naturally drawn to the natural world.
What's the most sort of popular activity you might do with, say, the preschoolers or even the little babies?
So we really have a process that we go through that have these core routines that we do every week. I mean, for sure, the short answer is we do bird sits every single time we're out there. And that is something that really is a big part of our work with young children. But we have all of these core routines. We always start together in a gratitude circle, acknowledging nature, being in nature, and giving thanks for nature. And I have to say that's where children's words shine. And some of the things that they put forth and that they notice really stop the adults in their tracks and make us more sensory engaged, because they're really feeling the whole world with their whole body, especially in a preschool age. They're feeling the wind, they're feeling the rain on their cheek. So it really brings us into the forest. And then we go through this whole cycle of routines, whether it's game and scavenger hunts. And we always have a portion of our day dedicated to sitting in silence, listening to the birds, both with our eyes open, with our eyes closed. And then as the children get older, they have a journal and they pick one page to capture and draw something that really made a mark on them for that day in nature. And so I would say bird sits are one of the biggest parts of our process. And children come to learn the calls of birds when a predator's on the land. And they kind of think they can, they learn to communicate or understand the communication of birds, which really fires them up and connects them deeply, because they feel like they're talking to animals. And that's something I really learned from John Young and his work and Weaving Earth and their work, where they call it bird language, but it's a whole process of learning to understand how the other species on the landscape are communicating and join that story, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So bird sit is sitting in quietness, listening to the birds, and then when they're a little bit older, maybe drawing a bird. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's called Sit Spot in other places if you're reading about it for adults, I think, a lot of the time. But the key is we always go to the same place. And so the children find their quiet space, but we go to the same place over over at least 1 year, sometimes more years. And so they're seeing the changes in season. They're seeing the change from when it's really dry when we first start to when it's raining. And now this time of year, January, February. So they're starting to understand the cycles and the changes in nature. So that's another key part, is that consistency of going every week to the same place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think that animals are a very good way in to connecting with nature. And we have a variety of goats and cows and ponies and things. But really the easiest animal to start with kids is the guinea pig. And the guinea pig, they sit there. And they have their little noises. They buzz when they're happy, and so they start there. So even a timid child can sit with the guinea pig on a bit of carpet, and then move up to feeding the goats, and then approach and then look out for other animals and have some sort of connection. So I love the idea of bird sit. That's really beautiful.
I was gonna say, we talk a lot about how getting the children to engage in kind of a practice, I guess, of empathy, of like, how do you think the animal is feeling? So if the bird is singing and then happy, or if the bird's like maybe warning the rest of the birds. So with the guinea pig, it made me think of that, because if they're really kind of a jovial animal, so to speak, or you can hear the buzzing, like getting them to tune into the animal and how it's feeling is a great empathy practice that we've really see empathy really grow over the 3 years that children spend in the forest in our program.
Mm-hmm. And one of the nature magic questions is, do you have a spiritual experience in nature you'd like to share? I think the little kids sharing their gratitude in the morning is wonderful. Have you anything else?
Yes, I think some of the experiences, for me, nature is my spiritual place, the house versus like a place of worship. Like nature is where I go to just connect with and recognize kind of that spiritualness in our life, and just noticing all of the different ways it's connected, and is really just a spiritual experience for me. But I feel like watching the animals interact. So like watching an animal, a predator, for example, bird, out there hunting or feeding its children, or all of that really is humbling to see how that world exists, whether I'm there or not. And if I get to come and kind of spy on it and sit quietly and be a part of it, I think it's really humbling to see how much more is happening around us as humans.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have a bird box webcam. So we have a little webcam in a bird nest, and it's normally a blue tit. And the amount of work that goes on with the building the nest and rearing the young that would go on without us, whether we were there, and has been going on, is astounding when you get to see it.
And I think so many different animals, whether it's like the guinea pig that moves so quickly or the mouse that moves so quickly, or like a great blue heron, and just sitting there and watching it slowly move through the world, whether it's stalking or just in peace, like all those different engagements with different species is really amazing, just because it gets all of us to understand how much there is out there that is different life experiences.
Mm-hmm. And I think it helps children as well, because we don't know what they're going through. Some of these children at home, different traumas and things they're worried about. And even children with autism. We've lately had a child with autism come up just to be with the horses and donkeys. And he had been very distressed, and the horses and donkeys really, really helped.
A number of experiences like that in our program. I feel like every year we see a child or a few children who would have struggled more inside the classroom if that was their only setting to be in a learning experience with peers. And then we bring them into nature, whether they need more space and they're kind of crashing into the walls, whether we had an autistic child in our camps once. We had a child once with selective mutism who didn't speak for a full year. And then once we started, he was part of the initial starting of this nature program. And a couple months in, he started to speak. And just that, I'll never forget that experience. It was our first year starting that nature program. And just seeing a child who really just developed his voice in nature was so, talk about a spiritual experience. It was really amazing to watch. So we see that every year, where children find more success in nature than they might just in our normal walled world of schooling.
Yeah, that's giving me shivers. And it also reminds me of a story of a child who had selective mutism. I think it was a novel, but it was based on a true story. And she didn't speak for years. So she was quite old at the time, 8 or 9. And then they got her a pony, or she was able to go to a local riding club, and they got her the pony, and she absolutely loved the pony. And eventually she had to say halter or lead rope or something, because you just have to, she was trying to do a thing, and the pony brought it all out and has such a success. Anything else you'd like to tell us about what you do with Stretch the Imagination and all of your work?
Well, one thing I'd say is something we learned this year as a silver lining to all that we're going through in this year of COVID is we normally go out into the forest once or twice a week, rain or shine every week. And this year, because of just the safety aspect of it, we spent our entire fall out in the forest 5 days a week.
Wow.
And it was really exciting to see. Even going out once or twice a week, we would notice patterns. But when you were out there every single day, for example, one of our classes kind of had a great horned owl sleeping, a pair of them right near where they would meet every day. And then to notice the patterns. And then one day they were gone, to question where they went, to even know that. If that had been once a week, it might have been an anomaly for them. And they might not even notice if once they were gone, because they thought, oh, maybe they're only here every once in a while. But when you're there every day and that's their home, just like I have a home, it was just really powerful. And it happened throughout all our classes, just different patterns that I think the daily venture into nature really showed us. And of course, I'm sure in the years coming forward, we'll go back to, I can't imagine going back to 1 day a week. I think we'd have to do 2 days a week now, just because it's been such a valuable experience. But it really was what we turned to. Nature, talk about, children who are dealing with a trauma or a different situation. Nature was where we turned, and what allowed children to be in school since June for us.
Yeah, that was a benefit, actually, I suppose, from COVID. But it's so valuable what you're doing, and even in later life, and they'll be able to go back there I mean, what you've given them is so precious. They won't forget that. So well done.
We definitely hear that they continue to go back to the Presidio. It becomes like a beloved place for them in the world. It's interesting. We have a program or a group here called the Children in Nature Network that Richard Louv, the same person who wrote that book, had started. And I went to one of his conferences once, and he was talking or gave a challenge to everyone that, if you remember a place in nature that meant something to you as a child, know that there are less and less of those places in the world today for children. And if you can take on the challenge to expose at least one child to a special place in nature and ripple that out through the world. And I've always thought about that, of how many children we're allowing to have this special place in nature.
Any positive actions that you can suggest that we could do to support nature, or even that the children could do?
I think children are so powerful. I mean, there are simple things like collecting trash if you see it in the planet. We're a project-based approach to early childhood. So we've had a lot of projects around how are we impacting nature, like you talk about leave no trace. Mm-hmm. And so just really understanding that concept and taking it upon yourself that if your neighbor leaves a trace, that you can help restore nature, even if you're doing it for somebody else. I wish if I could do one thing for the planet today, that we could bring back more undeveloped places like your sanctuary. I mean, it's a sanctuary for humans too, to have a place to connect with nature. And as that disappears, the more that people can do to protect or to help organizations that are protecting, I think that it really is, I think, going to be the key to our soul surviving in the future, because there is something very, very spiritual, like you said, or very connective, something we need about connecting with nature.
Well, thank
connection.
You.
So
that's really kind to say that. And nearly half of the nature sanctuary is just left over to wilderness, and it's actually shattered limestone pavement. So there's rocks and there's hazel trees and a lot of bushes. So when we opened, people said, why do you need a sanctuary for bushes? And there was little understanding, but they actually, the mindset has changed, and they do value it now. But those bushes, what they harbour is just, they're an ark for the wildlife, really. And it's just, when you were talking about the trash as well, two things came to mind. We have a trash experiment, which is a sort of a board with a wire on top and little compartments, and we put in the different bits of trash. So it's there permanently, and a wild animal can't take it away. So there's a sort of woolly hat, and there's a plastic bottle and some paper. And then the children go back, and there's a little sign by it, go back year after year and see what has actually rotted away and what hasn't. The woolly hat obviously wasn't woolly because it's still there.
Yeah.
7 years.
That's a great example.
It is.
I love that because it's so visual.
It's so visual, and it's fairly easy to make. Just to make a sort of shallow square board, 4 foot by 4 foot, with little compartments and a wire grid on top. So you put the little bits of rubbish in there that animals can't take out. But I often think too, if plastic suddenly became valuable, that we could use it for making fuel or something, the children would be quite happy to go around and gather it all up,
Right.
That would be the solution. You could pay them or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, so they like doing their rubbish collecting, and they like being useful and ticking off boxes, and what can we do to help the planet. And are there any other activities that you'd like to share with us?
One thing I was just thinking about, it's not necessarily an activity, but it's something that informs a lot of the work, is that we really have spent a lot of time reading about and listening to the indigenous people of the United States. The Native Americans lived in such connection and community with nature. And so I think it would be interesting for everyone around the world to just investigate how did people live in in harmony with nature. Before, for survival, we needed nature. We needed to understand it. We needed to know what predators might be out there for us. And now a lot of people don't technically need it to survive. They think. I would disagree with that, but I've just found like a lot of our practices of even giving thanks, of waking up in the morning and giving thanks to the natural world as we start our day with children, it comes from the Native American practices in our country. And so much of what we do does. And so that's something I think that everyone could do in their community, is just who used to live on the land where, before, thousands of years before we did, who lived there first. And San Francisco, we've studied the tribe that lived here, and the Ohlone people, and the actual sect of the Ohlone people, and just knowing that, I think, is really connective too.
That's so interesting. And the Native American culture is so rich. I suppose we do a little bit here. We think about who lived on the farm from the Iron Age people, and then there's a famine village on the farm, and they were gathering oyster shells and things from the sea, which isn't too far away, to eat. And I do an imagination exercise with them. We have a gypsy wagon shelter. So it looks like a gypsy wagon, but it's actually slightly larger. You can fit a whole class in, 20 people sitting down. So they're all a bit tired at that stage, and we have a drink there. And I say, if you were living here 100 years ago, traveling around in the wagon, what would you need? And they're like, oh, we need a horse. And then what would you eat? Oh, we'd eat a cow. And I said, really? What else did you eat? And it goes from there. And they really have to think. We go to the shop. No, there isn't a shop.
Right.
Yeah, it's the same idea. So can you tell us a tiny bit about the tribe you mentioned? Is there anything particular that you learned about that you'd like to share?
Well, they lived in the land and in the area that's the Bay Area, which is where San Francisco is today. And then they were obviously over time pushed out of this area as it was discovered and colonized and kind of recognized for resources. But for example, even further north from San Francisco, which a lot of people travel to, up into kind of the Sonoma coast, the coastal Miwok is another tribe. And a lot of these tribes, for example, would harvest acorns. So I've done an activity with children where we harvest the acorns when it's the time, we dry them, then you grind them and you make flour. And then you learn about how you can't just eat that flour. You have to wash the tannins out. And then you can actually make like a tortilla out of it. So even that whole, of course, with children and young children, and that I did with elementary school children, actually. But, working with your hands and doing hands-on activities is the key. And they love that. But just knowing something that they kind of walk over and see on the ground around them, it was actually food before. Is a great activity. So things like that, where it was a staple in a culture where we don't even actually really recognize it as a food source today. And connecting back to that.
But that's a brilliant activity. Really, really, really good one. I can imagine by the time they made the tortilla, they were pretty hungry and valued it.
Well, and so much fun, right? Because it actually, the process that takes days but the fact that then they've put all this work, they've ground it, they've collected it, they've done all this stuff, and then they actually get to eat it. Kids obviously love to eat, but cooking is such a and it really makes a sensual experience as well, where you're tasting it and you're feeling it. And
they'll never forget that. They'll be saying, do you remember when we went
exactly.
with Miss and we went and made the acorn pancakes? And that's a brilliant one. Well, they're only short interviews on Nature Magic, but I think I've got the real crux of what you do. It's really beautiful, all the work you do. Would you like to tell everybody how they can connect with you, if you'd like them to connect with you, or anywhere you'd like to point them towards?
Sure, absolutely. My email is a great way to connect. It's just Michelle@stretchtheimagination.com, all spelled out and kind of a long email. Sorry about that. But also we have a website, www.stretchtheimagination.com, which is our preschool website. You can always connect to me from there. And anyone's welcome. And if you ever come, if anyone who's listening comes to the Bay Area, would love to connect with them as well. We're in the heart of San Francisco.
Oh, that's a wonderful invitation. We'll all be flocking over as soon as the COVID restrictions.
Yeah, once those are all over, of course.
Yeah. So I'll put those in the show notes so people have the right addresses. There's one thing I forgot to ask you. You were talking about Richard Louv and his book, but are there any other books you'd like to recommend for people?
One of my favorite books that I've read in the last year and a half, 2 years, is a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And it's by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And she's actually a doctorate biologist in the United States. And she has the most beautifully written, it's almost poetry in how it's written. And she does pull on her indigenous background from her father. And it's just really, it's a wonderful book, though, about how we can learn from nature and restore nature and understand it and work in harmony with it. I thought at first from the title, it was going to be like the subtitle about biology, but it's not. It's about life. And it's a really wonderful story and book. It's probably one of my favorites in the last 2 years that I've read.
Oh, that's lovely. I've seen the cover of it and I was wondering, but now to get a recommendation for it, I'll definitely read that.
Yeah. And the other one I would say is Richard Louv's newest book. And it's all these great stories from really around the world about connection to other species and how smart they are. And it was an amazing, we always think of like a dolphin as being so smart, but this was about the octopus and about so many different things. I found it a fascinating kind of storytelling as well as science and data-driven reality. That's a really fun book to read.
That sounds fabulous. We have, whenever we go around the nature walk, the different kind of naturey people turn up, and there's been ant people and bee people and, you always get to meet them. And then the guy, I can never remember the ant person, myrmecologist, something like that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he was at the ant hill and showed us all the herbs that the ants had brought onto their garden for the health of the hive. And the fact that they were actually gardening them, so they weren't letting them run, get woody, they were trimming them off. They had thyme as an antiseptic and they had sage. Yes. So, the intelligence of their community, and we just walked past saying, oh, yeah, it's an anthill.
Right. No, that book is filled with stories like that. I loved it. If you have a pet, it really connected me. I felt like with my dog, who was like often lying on me while I was reading the book. They talk about just kind of that and how your pets like learn and to read you. And then you start seeing it happen. It's really amazing. I loved that book. It's his latest one. He just released it, I think, last January.
Okay. Yeah, another person I hope to get on the podcast is a guy called Warwick Schiller, and I've been watching his videos working with one of our horses, and it's all about communicating with horses. And he started off being quite a tough, horse fixer with problem horses, and now he's gone down the relationship path, and he's completely woo-woo, and he's like, walk alongside your horse and match the steps, and then it's totally relationship-based. It's fantastic.
So, it's cool to see a transformation in someone.
Yes, it's so cool. And he's very humble himself about it. He's like, now I'm totally woo-woo. But he can still get it very difficult. He has his new series of videos, a very difficult mare that's kicking out every time you get up on her. And he spends a long time just sort of standing around with her. And by the end, he just rips off the bridle and they're galloping around with no bridle on. And the owners are flabbergasted. It's so cool.
It is amazing how many people use the word humble when they're in relation with nature. I think it is a humbling experience to be in relation with nature. I think if the whole world were in relation with nature, we'd probably have a different experience globally.
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant place to stop. It was just great for you to come on the podcast. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so nice to connect. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Nature Magic. Please subscribe to the podcast to help with our reach and give us a rating. Each month in 2021, we're running a draw. And the prize this month is a selection of beautiful Irish gifts from the Burren Nature Sanctuary gift shop, including a stunning original Burren Flower Fairies print by local artist Susan Meany. To be in the draw, simply review the podcast and send a screenshot to mary@burrennaturesanctuary.ie. The email address is in the show notes. We hope you have a happy and healthy 2021.